Let's dive in. This time, we're taking a look at Dario Argento's Tenebrae, a 1982 Giallo film.
Oh, a classic.
It is. Should be a good one.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, it's really interesting how Argento uses Tenebrae to kind of address some of the criticism he was facing at the time.
Oh, interesting. Using the film as a platform.
Exactly. But first, for those who haven't seen it, let's set the scene a bit. Tenebrae takes place in Rome, and it follows Peter Neal, an American horror author. He's there on a book tour promoting his new novel. Guess what it's called?
Tenebrae.
Tenebrae, of course. But things get a little complicated when a series of murders starts happening. Each one seems to be inspired by his book.
Oh, wow. Talk about a book tour gone wrong.
Right. So we've got Neil, his agent Bulmer, his assistant Anne, and then the detectives on the case, Germani and Altieri. All these characters, they're all intertwined in this web of mystery and suspense. And then the killer's identity is revealed. It's a huge twist, like totally unexpected. And it actually ties back to Neil in a way you wouldn't believe. Classic Argento.
Makes you question everything you thought you knew.
Oh, absolutely. Every character, every relationship. It makes you realize that people will go to great lengths to keep their secrets buried.
And speaking of secrets, did you know that Argento drew inspiration for this film from a real-life experience?
Oh, yeah. A pretty creepy one, too.
Yeah, he had a stalker.
Yeah.
An obsessed fan who kept calling him making threats.
It's scary how sometimes real life can be even more terrifying than fiction.
Definitely. And you can really see that fear, that anxiety reflected in Tenebrae, the way it blurs the lines between the artist and their creation. Like he's exploring the potential consequences of digging too deep into the darkness.
It's almost as if he's saying that by creating art about darkness, you might actually invite it into your life. But it wasn't just this one personal experience, right? He was also influenced by what he saw happening in society at large.
That's right. He was really shaken by the violence he saw in Los Angeles. It really affected him. He wanted to capture that sense of true horror, you know, the kind that comes from acts of violence that seem to have no rational explanation.
Senseless violence.
Exactly. And you can see that reflected in how he portrays Rome in the film. It's modern, almost futuristic, with none of the usual landmarks.
That's interesting. So instead of using those classic creepy settings we're used to in horror films, like, old castles or dark forests, he's putting the horror in these bright, sterile environments.
Exactly. And it makes it even more unsettling because it highlights that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the most modern and seemingly safe spaces. And speaking of visuals, we can't forget about Argento's masterful camera work. That iconic Luma crane shot, for example, where the camera glides over the house and peers through the window.
Oh, man, that shot is incredible. Took 3 days to film.
3 days. Talk about dedication. But it's not just about technical skill. It's also a brilliant way to represent the themes of voyeurism and the invasion of privacy that run throughout the film. It's like the camera itself becomes a predator stalking its prey.
It definitely adds to that feeling of unease and suspense. You never know who's watching or what's lurking around the corner.
And speaking of lurking, one of the most compelling aspects of Tenebrae is its exploration of dark doubles. You see it in the mirrored imagery, locations, even the characters themselves.
Oh, like how Neil is suddenly revealed standing behind Detective Germani.
Precisely. That shot is a perfect visual representation of the killer and the investigator as two sides of the same coin. They're both drawn to the darkness, both trying to unravel the truth, but for very different reasons.
It's like they're mirroring each other, reflecting those hidden, darker impulses that exist within us all. And you see this doubling throughout the film, in the characters, in the locations, even in the way some of the murders are carried out. It's almost like Argento is saying that we all have a dark side, a shadow self, that we might not even be aware of.
It's a really thought-provoking concept. It makes you question our perceptions of good and evil and whether the line between the two is as clear-cut as we like to think.
And it's not just the characters, right? This idea of dark doubles extends to the locations as well.
Absolutely. Think about the contrast between the bright, sterile interiors of those modern apartments and the dark, shadowy alleys where the murders take place. It's like Argento is visually representing the duality that exists within society itself, the hidden underbelly, the secrets that lurk beneath the surface of everyday life.
It's all connected. And speaking of connections, have you noticed how vision impairment plays such a significant role in Tenebrae?
Oh, absolutely. Characters constantly misinterpreting or missing crucial visual details. It's like they're blind to the truth that's right in front of them.
And those missed details, those misinterpretations, They have devastating consequences.
It's a reminder that we can't always trust what we see, that our own perceptions can deceive us. And this idea of vision impairment ties directly back to the theme of dark doubles. It's like Argento is saying that we're all susceptible to being tricked by appearances, that we may be blind to the darkness that exists within ourselves and in the world around us.
And on a meta level, it makes you wonder if Argento is also commenting on the way we consume art. Our way, as viewers, sometimes blind to the deeper meanings or the potential consequences of what we choose to watch.
Especially with a film like Tenebrae, which so directly addresses the criticism Argento himself faced for his graphic depictions of violence against women.
You're talking about the scene where a character criticizes Neil's books for their content, essentially mirroring the accusations that were leveled at Argento himself.
Exactly, it's a bold move. By incorporating that criticism into the film, Argento forces us to confront the relationship between the artist and their creation. It's like he's asking, who's really responsible for the violence? The artist, the audience? Or is it something deeper, something inherent in society itself?
It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Tenebrae such a powerful and thought-provoking film. It doesn't shy away from uncomfortable truths. It challenges us to think critically about the art we consume and the role it plays in shaping our understanding of the world.
And it raises questions about the nature of guilt, responsibility, and the power of art to both reflect and influence society. It's a film that stays with you long after the credits roll.
Absolutely. And we'll be diving even deeper into those questions after a quick break. So we're back. And one thing that really stuck with me is how Argento handles sexuality in Tenebrae, especially how it's connected to violence.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme he explores pretty explicitly.
He does, and it's often pretty uncomfortable to watch. Like, he really wants to make the audience squirm a little.
Right, he forces us to confront those darker impulses, the things that society tries to sweep under the rug.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this definite sense that characters who, don't conform to traditional gender roles or who engage in, I guess you could say, deviant behavior, they're punished for it.
Yeah. Like those early murders, the lesbian journalist and her lover, or that shoplifter who uses her sexuality to manipulate men. It's almost like Argento is suggesting that their defiance of convention somehow makes them targets.
And then you have the first killer, Cristiano Berti, that seemingly straight-laced TV presenter. He sees himself as this moral crusader, cleansing society of what he considers perversion.
It's chilling how he justifies these brutal killings with his own twisted sense of morality.
It is. It makes you think about how societal norms can be used to justify violence. It's a theme that feels pretty relevant today, especially with all the debates we're having about censorship and individual freedom versus morality.
Right. But what I find really interesting is that Argento doesn't just focus on the obvious villains. Even Peter Neal, our protagonist, he's not exempt from this complex exploration of sexuality and violence.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Neal's own violent tendencies are directly linked to a traumatic experience from his childhood, that moment of sexual humiliation. It obviously left deep scars.
It did. And those flashbacks, they suggest that Neal's misogyny, which comes out in his writing, it stems from that repressed trauma. It's like he's channeling all that pain and anger into these fictional narratives of violence against women.
Exactly. And that ties back into the film's metafictional commentary. It makes you think about the role of the audience. What does it say about us if we find pleasure in these stories of violence?
Right, especially violence against women. It's a tough question to grapple with.
It is. It's like Argento is deliberately provoking us, making us confront our own potential for darkness and the ways in which we might be contributing to the cycle of violence, even through our consumption of entertainment.
It's a lot to unpack. But Tenebrae isn't just some philosophical exploration of violence and sexuality. It's also a visually stunning film. I mean, Argento's style, it's so unique. He creates a world that's both beautiful and terrifying. It's like a nightmare you can't wake up from.
You can't talk about the visuals in Tenebrae without mentioning that Luma crane shot again. It's so masterful.
The way it glides through the house, peering through windows, it's like a visual representation of the killer's own voyeuristic gaze.
Right, and there's that contrast between the bright, almost clinical lighting and those sudden bursts of darkness and shadow when the violence happens.
Yeah, it creates this unsettling duality. Like there's this whole other world lurking beneath the surface of everyday life.
And that duality is also reflected in the dark doubles motif we talked about earlier, the mirroring of characters, locations, even actions. It's like Argento is saying that the potential for darkness is everywhere.
Yeah, it's in all of us. The line between hero and villain, it's not always so clear.
Definitely not. And speaking of blurring lines, there's that repetition in the way some of the murders are carried out.
Oh, yeah. The same methods used by both killers. It makes it even harder to figure out their motives.
Exactly. It all adds to that sense of unease and makes you question everything you see.
Which brings us back to the controversies surrounding the film. The censorship issues, the video nasty label. All of that really highlights how art that pushes boundaries can provoke a strong reaction.
It's kind of ironic, right? A film about a killer inspired by a novel, and then it faces real-world attempts to silence its message.
It really shows how art can be seen as a threat to those in power, especially when it challenges their worldview.
But despite all the controversy, Tenebrae ultimately triumphed. It became a cult classic, praised for its style, its themes, and its willingness to explore the dark side of humanity.
It's a film that continues to resonate with audiences. Decades later, people are still talking about it, analyzing it, debating its meaning. It's a testament to its power and its enduring relevance.
Absolutely. And we'll continue exploring that power as we wrap up our deep dive into Tenebrae.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up our look at Tenebrae, I can't get over the look of the film. I mean, Argento is known for these stylish, almost dreamlike horror films. But in Tenebrae, everything is so real. The lighting is bright. The architecture is modern. It's almost jarring when you see it against the backdrop of these horrific crimes.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like he's intentionally stripping away the shadows, forcing us to see the violence in this stark, almost clinical way.
Right. It's not hidden in some dark corner. It's right there in the open, in these sleek, modern spaces that feel familiar but also unsettling, especially the way he portrays Rome. You never see any of those famous landmarks.
It's like he's created this imaginary city, right? A city that reflects the character's inner turmoil. And even though it's Rome, it feels like any modern city, any place where these dark secrets could be hidden beneath the surface.
And that sense of unease is amplified by the character's inability to see what's right in front of them. I mean, the motif of vision impairment is everywhere in Tenebrae. Characters constantly misinterpreting clues, overlooking details. It's like they're blind to the truth.
It's true. And that blindness, it leads to some pretty devastating consequences. And it makes you think, on a meta level, are we, the viewers, any different? Are we also missing something? Are we so focused on solving the mystery that we're overlooking something crucial?
Especially with all the metafictional elements in the film. The way it comments on the nature of art, the relationship between the creator and the audience, it makes you question your own role as a viewer.
You're right. Tenebrae isn't just about watching a story unfold. It's about engaging with it, questioning it, maybe even feeling a little uncomfortable with what you see.
And speaking of uncomfortable, we've talked about how controversial Tenebrae was when it came out. The censorship, the video nasty label, all because it dared to push boundaries and challenge societal norms.
It's a reminder that art can be dangerous, especially to those in power. When art challenges the status quo, there's often a backlash.
But Tenebrae survived all of that. It became a cult classic, a film that's still being talked about and debated today.
And that's a testament to its power, I think. It's a film that gets under your skin. It makes you think about the nature of good and evil, the darkness that exists in all of us.
It's not an easy watch, but it's a rewarding one. So if you haven't seen Tenebrae, I highly recommend checking it out. And as you watch it, pay attention to those visual cues, the mirrored imagery, the moments where characters fail to see what's right in front of them. Because in Tenebrae, the most terrifying monsters are often the ones we create ourselves.